If you retire with $1 million in your account, there's a very real chance you're going to die with $5 million. And I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, well, that sounds amazing. What's the problem? But the uncomfortable part is, that extra $4 million, you never got to spend it. You never took that trip to Italy. You never helped your grandkids with college, never lived the retirement you actually saved for. You just sat on it, scared until you died. I actually spend way too much time thinking about the moment when the paychecks stop, but the withdrawals don't. If you're close to retirement and there's a knot in your stomach about running out of money, or you're watching your parents slowly make decisions you're not sure they can afford, don't click away. Just make that red subscribe button gray. Trust me, I'm going to help you so much with your finances you can't even imagine, because this will change how you think about spending in retirement. Now hear me out. I'm going to show you the actual math behind why retirees are dying with way more money than they need, and more importantly, I'm going to explain the psychology that's causing this. Because this isn't really a math problem, it's a fear problem that we've dressed up in spreadsheets. Let me start with something that's going to sound completely backwards. The biggest financial risk in retirement isn't running out of money, it's not spending enough. And I can already hear you objecting. You're saying, no, all the articles, I've seen the news stories about retirees eating cat food. The biggest risk is definitely running out of money. But here's what most people don't realize. Those scary stories are statistical outliers, and the financial industry has been weaponizing your fear of becoming one of those outliers for decades, because terrified people don't spend money, and if you don't spend money, you keep more of it in their managed accounts. Follow the incentives here. Let me give you some actual numbers that are going to make you out of your mind. There's research from the Employee Benefit Institute that tracked thousands of retirees over their entire retirement. They looked at people who retired with different amounts of money and watched what happened to their account balances over time. And here's what they found. Retirees with $1 million or more at retirement, 18 years later, on average, they still had 85% of their original balance. Think about that for a second. After nearly 2 decades of retirement, after hundreds of thousands of dollars in spending, after market crashes and recoveries and everything in between, they'd only spent 15% of their money. But it gets stranger. The people who retired with lower balances, like $200,000, actually spent a higher percentage of their savings. The less money you have, the more you're forced to actually use it. The more money you have, the more it just sits there growing while you convince yourself you can't afford things. Now, you might be thinking this is just because wealthy people are more conservative or more responsible or whatever, but that's not what the data shows. What the data shows is that retirees across all wealth levels are dramatically underspending relative to what they could safely withdraw. We're not talking about 5 or 10% underspending. We're talking about people who could safely spend $70,000 or $80,000, spending $40,000 instead, for decades. The moment where it gets really dark is there was a study done by United Income that analyzed the spending patterns of retirees and compared them to safe withdrawal rate calculations. They found that the majority of retirees could have spent anywhere from 20 to 60% more than they actually did without any significant risk of running out of money. Let that sink in. Most retirees could have doubled their lifestyle and still died with money left over. So here's the question. Why? Why are people who spent 30 or 40 years scrimping and saving, people who delayed gratification their entire working lives so they could live well in retirement, why are they getting to retirement and then just not spending the money? The answer is actually fascinating, and it comes down to 3 psychological forces that nobody warns you about. I call them the 3 fears of retirement spending, and once you understand them, you're going to see them everywhere. Fear number 1 is the phantom expense. This is the belief that there's some massive, catastrophic expense lurking in your future that's going to wipe you out. Maybe it's long-term care, maybe it's a health crisis, maybe it's something you can't even imagine yet. But it's out there, waiting, and you need to hoard money for it. Now, look, I'm not saying you shouldn't plan for healthcare costs. You absolutely should. But here's what most people don't realize. Medicare and supplemental insurance cover the vast majority of healthcare costs for most retirees. And yes, long-term care can be expensive, but the median nursing home stay is less than 2 years, not 10. We're not preparing for the likely scenario, we're preparing for the absolute worst-case scenario, and then applying that level of caution to every single decision for 30 years. Let me give you an example. I know someone, let's call him Robert. Robert retired at 65 with about $1.3 million. Solid retirement savings. Not wealthy, but definitely comfortable. He and his wife wanted to take a trip to New Zealand. It was something they'd talked about their entire marriage. The trip would have cost maybe $12,000 total, but Robert couldn't do it. He kept saying, "What if I need that money for medical expenses later?" So they didn't go. They said they'd wait till next year when they felt more secure. Then his wife got diagnosed with early onset dementia at 68. They never took the trip. Robert still has over $1 million. His wife is in memory care, and he tells me all the time that not taking that trip when they could is his biggest regret. That's the phantom expense. It paralyzes you into inaction based on something that might happen, and in the process, you sacrifice the things that definitely could happen right now. Fear number 2 is the moving finish line. This one is really insidious because it sounds responsible. It's the idea that you need your money to last. But here's the thing, last until what? Most people don't actually have a number in mind. They just have this vague sense that their money needs to exist forever, just in case. Just in case what? You live to 105? Okay, but statistically, if you're a 65-year-old male, you have less than a 2% chance of living past 95. If you're planning your spending based on a 2% outcome, you're ruining the other 98% of scenarios. And here's what makes this really cruel. The older you get, the more money you have, because you keep underspending and your investments keep growing. So at 70, you think, well, I might live to 95, so I better be careful. Then at 80, you've got even more money, and you think, well, I might live to 100, better keep being careful. And the finish line just keeps moving further away until you die and leave it all to your kids who are already in their 60s and don't need it. There's actually a name for this in behavioral economics. It's called the annuitization puzzle. Studies show that retirees would be significantly better off converting more of their assets into guaranteed income streams, like annuities, because it would give them permission to spend. But they don't do it because keeping the pile of money feels safer, even though the research overwhelmingly shows that having guaranteed income makes retirees happier and more willing to actually enjoy their retirement. We prefer the illusion of control over actual security. Fear number 3, and this is the big one, the identity crisis. Here's what nobody tells you about retirement. For 40 years, you were a saver. You were the responsible one. You were the person who maxed out their 401k and drove a used car and brought lunch from home. That became part of your identity. You were good at accumulating money. You got little dopamine hits every time you checked your account and saw the balance go up. And now you're supposed to just flip a switch and become a spender. You're supposed to watch that number go down and feel good about it. It doesn't work that way. Your brain doesn't just reprogram itself because you hit 65. And here's the really twisted part. The better you were at saving, the harder this transition is. The most successful savers become the most miserable retirees because they can't give themselves permission to undo 40 years of conditioning. I saw this with my parents. My dad worked for the same company for 38 years, saved religiously, retired with about $800,000 plus pensions and Social Security. By any reasonable calculation, he and my mom could spend $5,000 a month without even touching the principal. You know what they actually spend? About $2,500. My dad still clips coupons. He still buys the cheapest generic everything. He still acts like they're broke. And when I try to talk to him about it, when I show him the math, he just says, "You never know what could happen." He's 79 years old with more money than he's ever had in his life, and he's living like he's on the verge of poverty. That's not financial planning. That's trauma. Now, let's talk about the math, because I know some of you are thinking, okay, but isn't it better to be sorry? Isn't underspending just being prudent? And the answer is not if you understand how retirement withdrawal strategies actually work. The most famous withdrawal strategy is the 4% rule. You've probably heard of it. It says you can withdraw 4% of your initial retirement balance in year 1, then adjust that dollar amount for inflation each year, and historically, your money would have lasted at least 30 years in almost every scenario. So you retire with $1 million, you withdraw $40,000 in year 1, then adjust for inflation from there. You're back down to $960,000. That grows to about $1.27 million by the end of year 1. In year 2, you withdraw $41,000 adjusted for 3% inflation. You're back down to $986,000. Do you see what's happening? Even while you're spending, your balance is still growing in most years. This is the hidden math that retirees don't understand. At a 4% withdrawal rate with reasonable market returns, your account balance doesn't steadily decrease, it fluctuates. Some years it goes down, especially during market crashes, but in the majority of years it goes up. So 10 years into retirement, you've withdrawn maybe $470,000 adjusted for inflation, and you check your balance and you've still got $1.2 million. 20 years in, you've withdrawn $1 million and you still have $1.5 million. And you die at 88 with $1.8 million, and your kids inherit money that you could have used to actually enjoy the life you worked so hard for. Now, I can already hear the objection. You're thinking, but what about sequence of returns risk? What if I retire right before a crash? And that's a legitimate concern. If you retire in January of 2008 and the market immediately tanks, that's rough. Your balance drops and you're still taking withdrawals, and that can do permanent damage to your portfolio. But here's what the research shows. Even in those worst-case scenarios, you know what helps the most? It's not having a massive safety buffer, it's being willing to reduce your spending by 10 or 15% temporarily during major downturns. That's it. If you can cut from $40,000 to $35,000 for a few years during a crash, your portfolio survives almost every historical scenario. But most retirees don't do that. Instead, they permanently underspend by 30 or 40% for their entire retirement just to avoid the possibility of having to temporarily underspend during a crisis. It's like wearing a parka every single day of your life, including in summer, just in case there's a blizzard. Yeah, you'll be prepared for the blizzard when it comes, but you're going to be miserable the rest of the time. Let me give you another example that really illustrates this. There's something called the consumption gap in retirement research. Studies show that retirees' spending naturally declines as they age, even when they have plenty of money. People in their 60s spend more than people in their 70s, who spend more than people in their 80s. And that makes sense, right? You're more active in your 60s, you travel more, you do more. By your 80s, you're slowing down naturally. But here's the tragic part. When researchers looked at the timing of this decline, they found that it's not just about desire, it's about ability. By the time you're in your late 70s or early 80s, a lot of the things you wanted to do when you first retired, you physically can't do them anymore. You can't take that European walking tour. You can't go skiing. You can't do the road trip across America. Your body won't let you. So you sit at home with all this money watching TV because all the expensive stuff you were saving up for is now impossible. This is why financial advisors are increasingly talking about the concept of spending curves in retirement. The idea is that you should actually plan to spend more in your younger retirement years, in your 60s and early 70s, when you can most enjoy it, and less later. But that's the opposite of what most retirees do. They scrimp and save in their 60s when they're healthy, planning for their 80s, and then by the time they get to their 80s, they're too frail to spend the money anyway. Now look, I'm not saying you should blow all your money in the first 5 years of retirement and live on ramen at 85. That's not the answer. But what I am saying is that you need to understand the actual probabilities, not the fear-based worst-case scenarios. Here's what the data actually shows. If you retire with $1 million and follow a reasonable withdrawal strategy, the probability that you'll run out of money before you die is somewhere between 5 and 15%, depending on the assumptions you use. That means there's an 85 to 95% chance you'll die with money left over. And yet, retirees behave as if the probability of running out of money is 50% or higher. We're treating a 5 to 15% risk like it's a coin flip. And here's the really important part. That 5 to 15% isn't evenly distributed. The vast majority of running out of money scenarios happen because of a few specific identifiable things. You retired right before a major crash and refused to reduce spending at all. You had catastrophic health expenses that weren't covered by insurance. You lived to 105. These aren't mysterious black swan events. They're specific, often preventable scenarios. So here's what you actually need to do. Here's the action plan that reconciles the math with the psychology. Step 1. Define enough. Sit down and calculate what it would actually cost to live the retirement you want. Not the retirement you think you should want, not the retirement your parents had, the one you actually want. Include travel, include hobbies, include helping your grandkids if that's important to you. Add it all up. Then stress test it. Add 20% for unexpected expenses, add another 10% for healthcare inflation. Now you have a real number. That's your annual spending goal. Step 2, calculate your floor. This is your guaranteed income. Social Security, pensions, annuities, anything that keeps coming in no matter what happens to the market. For most retirees, this covers at least 50 to 70% of essential expenses. This is your safety net. You can't run out of this money because it's not a pile, it's a stream. Step 3, fund your lifestyle. Everything above your floor income needs to come from your portfolio. Take that number and divide it by your portfolio balance. If the result is less than 5%, you're almost certainly fine. If it's between 5 and 6%, you're probably fine but should be prepared to be flexible. If it's above 6%, you might need to either reduce your expectations or consider working a bit longer or part-time. And step 4, and this is the most important one, give yourself permission. This is the psychological work. You need to actively deprogram the scarcity mindset that got you here. One technique that works is to separate your money into buckets. Bucket 1 is your essentials. That's untouchable. That's your security blanket. Bucket 2 is your lifestyle spending. That's what you calculated in step 1. Give yourself explicit permission to spend this money. That's what it's for. Bucket 3 is your legacy. If leaving money to your kids is important to you, great. Calculate how much you want to leave them and put it in bucket 3. Now, forget about it. It's gone. It's not your retirement money anymore. It's their inheritance. You don't get to count it when you're deciding whether you can afford that trip or that new car. The bucket system works because it externalizes the mental accounting you're already doing. Instead of this vague sense that all your money needs to last forever for unknown reasons, you're explicitly deciding what each dollar is for. Here's another technique that helps. Use percentages, not dollars. Instead of saying, I spent $12,000 on that trip, say, I spent 1.2% of my portfolio on that trip. When you frame it that way, it becomes obvious how small most expenses actually are relative to your total wealth. That $12,000 trip that feels enormous, it's 1%. If your portfolio grows by 7% this year, you just made $84,000 in market returns while you were sleeping. The trip was already paid for 7 times over. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but what about my kids? Don't I want to leave them something? And here's my answer to that. Yes, if that's important to you, but let's be honest about something. If you're watching this video, if you're someone who saved $1 million or more for retirement, your kids are probably going to be fine. They learned financial responsibility from you. They have careers. They're not destitute. And here's the thing that nobody wants to say out loud. They'd rather have memories with you than an extra $200,000 in their inheritance when they're 67 years old. I've never met a single person who said, I'm so glad my parents scrimped and saved and never took me on that trip or came to visit or helped with my kids because now I have a bigger inheritance. Never, not once. But I've met hundreds of people who say, I wish my parents had spent more time with us. I wish they'd been less stressed about money. I wish they'd actually enjoyed their retirement. Your kids don't want your money. They want you to be happy. And if they do just want your money, then they definitely don't deserve it. Here's the final thing I want you to understand, and this is the part that gets me a little fired up. The financial industry has conditioned you to be afraid. They've done this on purpose. Scared people are easier to sell to. If you think you're on the verge of running out of money, you'll pay someone 2% a year to manage your account. You'll buy expensive insurance products you don't need. You'll stay invested in their funds through every downturn because you're too afraid to make changes. Fear is profitable for them, and retirement is their most profitable market. But here's what they don't tell you. Underspending in retirement isn't prudent, it's tragic. You're not being responsible by dying with $3 million, you're just creating regret with compound interest. Think about it this way. Every dollar you don't spend in retirement is a dollar you worked for but never enjoyed. You traded hours of your life, years of your life for that dollar. You traded time with your kids when they were young. You traded experiences. You traded freedom. And for what? So it could sit in an account earning 4% while you eat off-brand cereal and refuse to turn on the air conditioning? That's not wealth, that's poverty with a brokerage account. Here's what I want you to do right now. If you're in retirement or approaching it, I want you to calculate your real safe withdrawal rate with your actual numbers. There are calculators online. FIC Calc is a good one. Portfolio Visualizer is another. Plug in your age, your balance, your asset allocation. Look at the actual probabilities, not the fear stories. And then I want you to identify one thing you've been putting off because of money. One trip, one hobby, one upgrade to your life. Something that costs less than 2% of your portfolio. And I want you to do it. Not next year, not when you feel more secure, now. Because here's the secret that took me way too long to learn. You will never feel secure enough. The finish line will always move. The phantom expense will always be lurking. The identity crisis will always be pulling you back towards scarcity. You have to make the conscious decision to override those impulses because they're not protecting you, they're robbing you. The hidden math of retirement isn't that complicated. If you save $1 million and withdraw 4% a year, you're probably going to die with more than you started with. That's it. That's the secret. The math works. It's been stress tested against every market crash, every recession, every worst-case scenario we have data for. The math is not the problem. The problem is that we don't trust the math because we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust that we'll be disciplined enough to reduce spending if we need to. We don't trust that we saved enough. We don't trust that we'll be okay. And so we just wait.
We wait for certainty that never comes. We wait for permission that nobody's going to give us. We wait until we can't wait anymore because we're too old or too sick or too dead. And look, maybe I'm getting too personal here, but I watched my grandmother do this. She was a depression baby, never had money growing up, worked her whole life, saved everything, retired with about $400,000, which in the early 90s was a lot, and she lived like she was broke until she died at 91. Never traveled, never bought herself anything nice, just sat in her little house, watching the news, worrying about money she had plenty of. My mom found her bank statements after she died. You know what she left behind? $680,000. It had grown for 27 years while she ate canned soup and refused to replace her 30-year-old furniture. $680,000 that nobody needed because she was too afraid to believe she had enough. I don't want that to be you. I don't want you to spend 40 years building wealth just to be too terrified to use it. Because here's the truth, you've already won. If you made it to retirement with a 7-figure net worth, you've succeeded at the hardest part. The accumulation phase is over. You did it. Now comes the part where you actually get to enjoy the fruits of all that discipline and sacrifice. But you have to give yourself permission. You have to trust the math. You have to trust yourself. So do the calculations. Understand the probabilities. Separate your money into buckets, and then take the trip, buy the thing, help your grandkids, live the life you worked for. Because the hidden math isn't just about how retirees with $1 million end up with $5 million. It's about how retirees with $1 million end up with regrets. And unlike money, you can't earn more time. You just run out.